Joni B. Cole, I've been wanting to have you on this show for some time. Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure. This is a great opportunity for me to finally really get a conversation with you.
I know. Well, you and I connected over your articles for Jane Friedman, which I have been a fangirl for. And I think I reached out to you for that. And yeah,
That's
finally we
right.
get to
Yeah.
chat and everybody gets to watch. Let me
Yeah.
tell people who may be watching a little bit about you, and then let's just see what we want to talk about.
Let's go for it.
Joni is the author of 2 books for writers, great titles, Good Naked and Toxic Feedback. Huge. I want to talk more about that. That's your most recent release, and something I also feel passionately about. She is an essayist. Her book, Another Bad Dog Book, is her own essays. She's the editor of a series called This Day, which features essays written by women about a typical day in their lives, hundreds of women, which sounds fascinating. Writing teacher and coach. We're like halfway through the bio here. Not even. Founder of the Writers Center in Vermont, where you teach, I love this quote, serious writers and nervous beginners, as well as at colleges, including Dartmouth and a variety of nonprofits. You are a contributor to sites like Jane Friedman, where you and I connected, and The Writer magazine. You were the program director for the Bookstock Literary Festival in 2022, and you're a creative consultant for companies and nonprofits. But wait, there's more. A guest lecturer and presenter at organizations and conferences across the country. And you're this one we're going to talk more about. You're a nominee for both the USA Fellowship Award and the Pushcart Prize. So welcome. I feel a little outclassed by you right now.
Nobody has ever said that to me before, Kevin.
You know what?
People are outclassed by me.
Play that up. You have got some serious credit. So let's start with, I don't know, let's start with the Pushcart Prize, because I'm dying to know.
Yeah, that was fun. It was in a little literary magazine, and it was nominated. I didn't even know how these things worked, but any literary magazine can nominate an essay, and then that essay also ended up in my Another Bad Dog Book essay collection, and it was though about me being hung over on a train. So lest you ever think the subject matter for a Pushcart Prize nominated essay needs to be very deep, it actually reflects my favorite kind of essay when I can pull it off, which is the surface is a true and funny. I mean, I was really, really hungover on this train, but that's just what it's about in terms of plot. The what it's about was about acceptance and disparity in terms of different cultures. And you'd have to kind of read it to see that interweaving, but it somehow my dyspepsia and my nausea and all that in that train ride intersected with meeting a Muslim woman who was wearing a veil and feeling so comforted by the fact I didn't have to look at her hair, because everything I was looking at was making me nauseous. So if that summed up that essay, then I guess I'm a better writer than I think. But I do like that piece a lot. That was a piece that meant a lot to me.
I will link to that book in the notes below.
Strangers on a Train is what it was called.
Okay. Original. Just kidding.
The essay. Yeah.
What year was that? Not the book, but what year did you win the Pushcart Prize?
Oh, I didn't win it. I was just nominated. Oh no, please spread that rumor. I don't know. It's like when God was a baby, Tiffany. I don't know, because I did that collection and then I did another 2 books, I guess, after that. So I'm sorry, I really don't know. That essay collection is interesting because it had a very small independent publisher. And then, like many of my publishers, about a year later, it went under. So I re-released. That's the only self-published book I had. I just so respect self-publishing, and I really want to learn more. But I actually did self-publish that book because, of course, I got the rights back, because who did I get them from? The publisher no longer existed. But I liked that collection, and it was not old. And so that was my brief foray into self-publishing. So new cover and things like that. But so that was interesting.
It was lucky you got the rights back in that situation. I've heard some horror stories from authors who really struggle to retrieve them after a publisher goes out of business. Was that, since I like digging into all the dark moments of a writer's life, was that hard when they went under? Like, was that after it had just been issued about a year ago and been doing well, it sounds like?
Yes.
How was
that? Yes, that was actually emotionally very difficult. And one thing about getting your rights back when, say, a publisher goes under is you have to be the assertive one. I didn't mean that she gave me, the editor or the publisher gave me a hard time, but I mean, if I hadn't spoken up, who knows where there would be no paperwork trail for me having the rights back. And more recently, my writing book, Good Naked, this very established publisher for the first edition, they too went under. And truthfully, if I hadn't actively asked for the rights back, I would not have been able to put out a new edition as I recently did, revised and with a new publisher that I just adore, because by default, those books from the previous publisher who went under were going to go and be fed right into Brandeis Publishing. So, which meant they would just let it sit on their back shelf or whatever, so I wouldn't have had the opportunity to revamp it, to give it a new life, to do any of that, because it would have just by default gone into one of their backlist titles. So, but I just am not usually really business savvy, but for some reason I actively said, oh, I want those rights back. I kind of envision I'm going to bring, because that publisher went under barely a year after that book went.
Do you start to think it's you, maybe? Just kidding.
Oh, I know it's me. My editor leaves immediately after my book. In a couple cases, the publisher goes under. It's definitely, do not publish me, because there's always some kind of
death knell.
Yeah, and I've had five publishers. So yeah, they're all in trouble.
For you'll see, you have 3, 4, 5, 6 books, right?
Well, I say 7 just because one's coming out in the fall.
Okay.
But yeah, and I'm kidding about them all going under. One was an imprint of Random House. Some were smaller independents. 2 were university presses, but no, not all of them went under.
So I sort of want to go back and do a little chronological, but first I love what you just said about both times, that it's not really like you to be, I guess, proactive in that way or direct. And you did it. And one of the things I like about your work, I've read Good Naked, and I'm eager to read Toxic Feedback. You and everything you write, everything you talk about, you are an advocate for authors, and you're an advocate for authors advocating for themselves.
Yes.
Was this a learned skill, or because it sounds like it did not maybe come naturally to you? And if so, how did you learn it?
Well, I am not an diminutive personality, so I don't have too much trouble sticking up for myself, but all of my efforts were always in the editorial realm. So I love feedback. I listen to feedback. I value feedback, but I never have any problem filtering it through my own lens or speaking back to an editor. It's always a nice conversation. I can be very assertive, or nope, I don't want to change that, or I'm going to change it this way. So in the editorial realm, it's our work. It matters, and similar to you, I know writing and I know editing. So I put a lot of work on it. When I get feedback that resonates, I take it immediately. But in the business realm, getting your rights back, representing your contract, reading your contract, something I just came through it. That's where I had to really say, come on, this is a business. And as much as you care about the book, the product, which is always where my focus has been, you don't want to screw yourself over by, maybe having a contract that could have been a little better, or squandering the rights to a book that could have been reprinted or revised, which is what happened with Good Naked. So yeah, I'm paying much more attention to this side of the business now, the business side. So
your article today in Jane Friedman's blog, which I will also put a link to below, sort of speaks to this idea too. Just to sum up briefly for people, but really I recommend reading it. It's a hilarious post. It's about the first cover for your book, Good Naked, which was appalling. And I'll let you explain how, and inappropriate. And you talked about not just knowing that that wasn't the right approach for your book, but how you had to balance professionalism and not burning bridges, and the fact that, we're all very, I hate to use this word, but grateful when we get published. It's like, oh, yay, this is an opportunity. And so how do you balance that with what you knew really strongly was a bad direction for the cover to go in, and where, per our contract, it's meaningful consultation on a cover, which is ironically entirely meaningless for the most part. Can you talk a little bit about what made you decide to advocate for that, and what it was like trying to walk that line? And also, you might go ahead and give people some background. Hopefully they'll read it, but it's pretty hilarious.
So the book Good Naked, How to Write More, Write Better, and Be Happier is based on like 25 years of scholarship, being a professional writer and a teacher. So obviously it's a book that mattered to me. And it's that kind of book, it's meant to be funny, but also prescriptive and very actionable. So I get the quote, final cover design. That's how the email was worded. One night, 5:30 p.m. after their offices are closed. And I open it up. It's just, you just got to see this cover, but it's basically a headless, torso of a woman, bare naked, very gloomy, moody. The O's in the word
porny.
Good.
Let's just say it was porny.
Oh, definitely porny and gross porny. Like ugh, you got to see it to believe. I'm like, I thought it'd been spanned or something. And of course, the funny note from this poor marketing manager who had to pass it on to me was, here's your final cover. We're all so excited. And then she says, oh, just ignore the white grid lines in a cover in progress. There's these very faint white lines over it. Those will be gone when we publish the book. And then I open this thing up and she's thinking I'm worried about these little faint white grid lines when I'm looking at a woman who basically looked like she was getting busy with herself. And, the O's around the breasts, it's just so bad. So the best thing about that cover ordeal, and in ways it was an ordeal. So was though there was no, oh, can I say anything? Oh, should I do anything? Oh, how am I going to put this nicely to them? I mean, I picked up that phone right away and said, no. It was not, though, an easy, I guess I will use the word battle, because at the time it felt like it. There was a lot of back and forth, and none of this made sense. The cover was clearly wrong for a book. This was a university press. Yeah, I know. It had none of the tone or feel of the book. And if they thought, because I had titillatingly used the word naked in the cover, there were a billion books, naked statistics, naked lunch, that, there was a very thematic reason for calling it Good Naked too in there. But if they thought that was their excuse for going in that direction, that didn't fly with me at all. So, but it turned out this designer had a lot of power in this press. I don't get it. The marketing people couldn't stand the cover, apparently, or at least that's the scuttlebutt. My editor was embarrassed by the cover, but somehow it made its way to me as, quote, the final cover. So I actually had to really fight this on my own. In fact, when I contacted my editor, who I really liked, and I said, I tried to word it better than that, but he said, I'm so glad you feel this way. Nobody in the meeting liked it. So I'm glad that you're going to try to change it. I'm like, I'm going to try to change it. Yeah. Who's standing up for me there? But I tell you, what a great yank out of pussyfooting around, out of being one of those authors who might, I am all about collaboration. I think sometimes when publishers are on the fence about my books, because I write in a genre that's often difficult to sell, I think because I am a very publisher-friendly author, I work well with publishers, I would try to be really collaborative. That has earned me some book contracts, I think, if that's the deciding factor. But so we can do both. We can be very collaborative. We have to really listen. We have to respect their expertise in the publishing realm. But by God, we don't have to take something that is just so wrong for our book. And every time I felt strongly, never this strongly about any other decision, but whenever I felt strongly about either an editorial or another detail related to production, I've had the powers that be have really listened. It's ended up that the whole product got better by having that really direct back and forth in a very civilized and respectful way. So, though let me tell you, it's a good thing I didn't send my first 40 email drafts when I when I saw that cover. There'd been nothing professional about those.
That was one of the things I really liked about the article, is that you did advocate for yourself pretty strongly, but we do have to remember this is our profession and a career, and it's a small business, and word gets around, about how an author comports themselves. So I thought you handled that so well, while still, the other thing I like that you said, or that I heard you say, is that this is your career, and this is your book, and you will be out marketing it, and you will be out standing behind it. You're the face of it. And while I do think that there is a certain element of pick me, like, oh yay, I've been anointed by the gatekeepers, if we're going a traditional route. I like that you also realize that you're a commodity for them, and I mean that in a good way. Like we're lucky to have a publisher. They're lucky to have you too.
Yeah And I think that keeping that in mind makes it a really respectful and lively and productive conversation. They need us and we need them. And so it's because anytime I've deferred simply out of, oh, can I say that, can I challenge that, it's never helped anything. It's not like they like me more, and it usually compromises the product a little bit. And so I've had recent discussions with the book that's coming out in the fall with my editor, who I just love. And she, for example, wanted to take out one of the essays in the collection. And at first I was in agreement. She's really thoughtful, really smart. And she was thinking it didn't fit in with whatever, the thematic arc or whatever. But then a day or two later, I thought about it, and I gave her a really measured response of, no, you know what, I think I want to keep that. And that's a pretty big change because it affects page count. But she wrote back, and this is very typical because I've had other conversations with other editors like this. Okay, fine. And, in a really lovely way. But what I did there, and what I've learned to do in every case when I'm going to refute something or I'm going to challenge something, is I give them alternatives, or I give them my reasons. So here's why I think this essay belongs in there. And of course, in thinking it through, I figured it out as much for myself as for her. It wasn't just, no, I want that essay in there. And so I think if you're going to challenge something, then offer an alternative, give it real thought, and articulate that thought. I like it articulating in writing, because then how do you convince somebody of something? By, inviting a discourse, but also stating and articulating what you believe, and also at times giving people an alternative. For that cover design, if I would have kept saying, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, which I did, but at some point it was, here's a possible alternative. And I think that goes over well too. You're not just saying, I hate this, you're offering an opening solutions to more creativity, different solutions. So that's something I've learned to do too, is, don't just criticize, move the conversation forward.
So you've been in this business a long time, and I think I'm starting to hear why. I think also one of the reasons you have such longevity, and I guess I'm asking rather than telling, I really like how, you do write books and you have a publisher and you're clearly doing what you love. But as when I read your bio, you have a lot of other irons in the fire as well. So I guess I want to start by asking how you got to where you are now. But I also want to talk a little bit about your approach to your writing as a career, where it's sort of multi-pronged, realistically diversified in the way I think writers kind of have to be to make this a viable career choice. But first, let's go way back, Joni. You're funny. You're always funny in most of your essays. Certainly what I've read in person, you have a really lovely way of bringing humor into things. Has this always been a part of who you were? And did you know you wanted to do something with that, with writing?
That's a lovely question. No, I did not always know that is who I was. Though my partner would say, oh, you just think you're so funny. And I agree. Yes, I do. But that's more an obnoxious trait than sort of a career path. But it's interesting because I would get that kind of feedback a lot on my writing. Oh, this is really funny. Like another bad dog book. when the reviews started coming in, most of them led with roll on the floor laughing, funny, that seems a bit of an exaggeration, but those reviews took me by surprise because particularly that era, when I was writing that book, I just had lost my parents there. Many of the subject matter of many of those essays is quite difficult subject matter. But when I got those reviews, and they recognized, that there was a heft to the pieces too. But when I got those reviews, it was such a beautiful learning experience because then I could see from the outside in, oh, that is one of the trademarks of your writing. And so ever since then, when I do all this revision and intuitive editing, I just love your book. That's one of the things that I look for is finessing the funny a little bit, not to overdo it because that's the worst, but because I now recognize that it's a trait, I want that as polished as every other aspect of the essay. And so that was a lovely bit of reader feedback that I got that I've really tried to honor in a way. Well, and I think also I do love to crack myself up. Sometimes when I am having trouble starting an essay, which is basically every morning, but one bit of advice my curmudgeonly friend Herb gave me once, so I don't know if it was advice or just a scolding, but I think I sent him an essay. It was kind of dry. And he goes, Joni, just stick to the funny. And honestly, that has been such a great advice, not because I limit myself to subject matter at all, but because my way in is often, oh, this funny thing happened, usually at my own, detriment, like something, but the other, just if we are observant as writers must be, so much happens that it's funny, even in tragic circumstances. And it's that little prickle of an exchange or a moment or an observation that made me laugh or smile at humanity, not at people so much, but just general humanity. That is almost always my in for essays. This little moment where I just did something that, oh my gosh, or somebody else did or whatever. And so sticking to the funny has really served in a practical way. And then from that moment, I have no clue what I'm going to write about usually, or the deeper part, the theme. And my essays are often braided, but that's enough to just start moving the pen. And so for me, the humor really serves in that way, especially like tender humor, not jokey humor at all. I can't. Oh my God, I can't even tell a joke, let alone write one. But observational humor.
Would it be accurate to say that that's kind of you, I guess, writing in what is your natural true voice?
Yeah. It's interesting because other forms of feedback that I get very often is, oh, she's conversational or accessible. My favorite reviews are aware, but exceptionally literary. I love that mix because that is what I'm going for. But that conversational voice takes me 30, 40 drafts a lot of times.
I love that you say that.
Yeah, I wrote this in some book or some essay, but normally when I start out to write, my shoulders are here and whatever. And I've learned patterns and ways to quickly get past all that. But I said, honestly, what comes out on the page is so still that I sound like Mr. Hal in Gilligan's Island. It's like, who's
getting that right now, except you and me and anybody our age are the only people getting that right now.
I know, I'm sorry. But imagine some pompous millionaire, billionaire and how they might talk, well, that's the voice that first lands on the page. And I'm like, what am I trying to do here? Let me undo this. Do you want to pause for a second? My phone is ringing.
Sure.
I don't know how to stop it. Hold on one second. Sorry about that.
That's not a problem.
But no, I'm 1 billion. I'm 1 billion% into revision. That's where it all happens. I love revision. I love your approach to revision and editing. It's where I feel comfortable. I have fun. And it's to me where the miracle of writing happens. So whatever lands on the page and hold on,
I'm leaving all this in here, kids. These are the outtakes.
trying to see how to unplug the phone. There.
So I'm sure it's very distracting for you, but we can hardly hear it on my end. So if you just
Oh,
want to
okay. I
ignore
just
it, I'll
unplugged
ignore
it.
it too.
Okay. Well, Tiffany, this is so funny. It's my landline. Who calls a landline?
Who
We,
has a landline?
well, in Vermont, it's
Oh, right.
usually works a little bit better. But anyway, I'm sorry. So
That's okay. Well,
whatever.
I want to stay where we are anyway, just because what I love about what you just said is that we're talking about this voice that is so you, this conversational, funny voice that takes you, in your words, 30, 40 revisions to get to.
I'm not
I think
kidding.
there's this misconception that the truest voice we have is blah, that voice, And I so agree with you. Everything you said about revision and editing are where the magic of the story happens. It's where you really get to dig out what you wanted it to be in the first place. And I think there's such a, not every writer, but a lot of writers find it to be torturous. And to me, I just think it's the fun part. Say more about that.
Yeah, I think it's a fun part too, but I can completely understand why people might feel it's torturous. One reason is because to me, it's where anyway, we should take all the time. That's where, so much of our time, is spent in revision, but it can be torturous if you don't know craft, if you don't know the art of revision, of how to find the problem and how to fix it, as per your book. And so, yeah, if I don't know my way forward, if I don't have any tools to write forward productively, then it's very frustrating. Well, this just feels boring, but I don't know what to do. This, could be better, but I don't have a clue how. This makes no sense. Oh my gosh, my early drafts, I told you, they're like, I just throw everything in a grocery cart and they're all over. How do I even begin? But when you understand the art of revision and have some narrative techniques and skills, then there is definitely a way to start chipping away at it that is productive, isn't overwhelming, and get you where you want to go every step from that first swirl of a draft to those final line edits that elevate it even further. So that's where I think the difference is between a torturous revision process and an informed, beautiful, fun one is knowing, how to revise and knowing narrative techniques that move you forward. So
Which we
that's
teach
what
the
my workshops
craft.
are all about, really giving those gifts to writers so that when they revise, they do so productively.
Okay,
So
tell me more about that. You have the Writer Center, which is your institute. What do you call it? Organization?
well, it used to be a room with orange walls, Tiffany, but we did great work. I just brought, it's my favorite color. It's a
Me
gorgeous
too.
background. And so I would do several workshops a week. And then when COVID hit, I went to Zoom and my teaching just exploded.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave up that little space and now I teach primarily on Zoom, though I do some in-person ones. And then I do a weekend writing retreat and I teach sometimes at Dartmouth. And so I'm all over the place, but all the workshops are to the same goal. We will meet you wherever you are at and give you whatever craft that you need or feedback. So if a seasoned writer understands the narrative techniques that allow you to show versus tell, then good, they'll get a refresher. But they'll also get feedback specific to their writing, which then helps inform their process moving forward. So it's all about, I wasn't being flip when I made the subhead of Good Naked Be how to write more, write better, and be happier. Because, writing more is good, I guess, but my goal anyway is to write more and write better. And I'm not kidding about the be happier part. And that's where being an informed writer, being in groups, availing yourself of feedback, reading certain resources like our books can really change your writing life in terms of giving us the muscle and the knowledge to do what we want to do, to write the pieces that we want to write. So without that, revision is torturous, and even with it, it's
Hard work.
it's hard work, but I have a great little guiding adage that works for me. It probably doesn't work for other people, but because I get so overwhelmed, particularly in the early revision stages, I tell myself, well, you can't know what you don't know. So I don't know what to do with a lot of those words on those pages, but I probably know one thing. I know that little paragraph on the bottom of page 7 in a 10-page mess of a draft, that might make a really good opening. It's the place I sat up. Well, I know that, so I moved that up. I know that I could clean this sentence up. I know that I know that flashback is going to work, but not at all near the opening. So I just start doing what I know. And when I let go of all the stuff I don't know, it makes it much more palatable and doable. And I also then don't get intimidated that it might take me 40 drafts, because I'll go through them much faster, just doing what I know. And there's another draft, and that will then inform the next draft, because then it becomes clear, oh, that part on page 2 should be your second scene or your closing scene or the reflective moment or whatever. So for whatever reason, in my mind, telling myself you don't need to know what you don't know has really alleviated the overwhelm and allows me to focus on the one thing that I do know. And I move the draft forward from there. So that helps with the psychological part of revision. And then, of course, the craft helps with just the nuts and bolts of, this hotspot moment full of emotion. It needs to be a scene. You can't just say she decided she would leave him, or she told him she was out of here. Show that little scenic moment, So, yeah. So there's real guidance in terms of how to revise that gets rid of that feeling that some people have of not enjoying it.
I like that the way you describe sort of taking it one bite at a time, or yeah, as I always say, don't look up at the peak of Revision Mountain, just start climbing one step in front of you at a time. I think that does make it more doable. It's like putting a puzzle together one piece at a time. And the fact that you talk about do the part that you know when you know it, because it does, just like a puzzle, as you get more and more pieces in there, you start to see what you need to do next more clearly, if I'm rephrasing you correctly.
Well, absolutely. I loved your analogy of Revision Mountain. And but because, immediately the listener can extend it to, like going up a mountain, one foot in front of the other. So I like that, because it speaks to the reality of revision. It inherent in that is the big task ahead, inherent in that analogy, but it also automatically kind of conveys, well, we know how to climb a hill one step at a time. And that really is the same, I think, with the revision process. I also think, I don't think in terms of trying to, again, in the early drafts, I don't think in terms of trying to fix something, because it's not fixable. That's not a negative. It's just, no, I got to reconstitute it. I got to split. Now that there's some words on the page, thank the Lord, the first thing usually is just splinter it, break it up. Oh, this could go here, this could go there, that could go there, not trying to kind of work with what I have in the order that I have it. There is no order. And the more I recognize that, the better, the faster I get to the next draft. So that also really, really serves. And of course, a little feedback along the way really helps. I also have one thing that I just have to share is I really, really want to continue my campaign against people vilifying their drafts, like Hemingway's,
or anything about
the first draft of anything is shit. Even our beloved Anne Lamott, shitty first drafts. I cannot stand that. I think that mentality is nothing but destructive. There is no shitty first draft. There is no shitty draft. It's just a draft. And the more we call it names, the more, who wants to then revisit? Who wants to, first of all, write a shitty first draft? Then who wants to revisit it? And why call it names when, thank God, it's words on a page? And yet in workshop after workshop, no matter what, my forceful voices keeps telling people, don't put down your drafts. People still come in apologizing for what it isn't. And I cannot on any planet think that serves. And while people will say, oh, it motivates me then to go at it again, I don't believe it. Not after 25 years of working with thousands of writers. I don't think it motivates it. I think it's something you have to overcome to then revisit that draft. And it extracts so much of the joy of writing. Instead of looking at this and saying, oh, thank God, I got some stuff down the page. I'm just looking at what isn't working, all the crap in it, calling it names. Why is that the mentality we want to go into the revision process with? It reminds me of an analogy I made in one of the books where it's like going into a hotel room and it's a beautiful room at the Ritz and everything's gorgeous and there's flowers, but instead you're looking through a black light and all you see are the terrible stains on the walls and stuff.
Okay, we can't go there because I'll never go to another hotel.
I know. So, but that's the same thing. Why not look at it through a different lens? What's there that is a hot spot? What's there that shows promise? What's there that, oh, that could be an opening if I revised it? What's there that, oh, here's where I'm connecting with the material? Look at it through that lens versus this constant negativity and apologize. What do we have to apologize for? It's just a draft. Thank goodness. And the second
part of the
draft
process.
is the third. Yeah.
It's a natural part of the process.
Yeah. By the way, I'm getting nowhere with this campaign because even these beautiful seasoned writers or seasoned workshoppers, I'll share this, but it's no good. I'll share this, but it's, crap. So I'm getting nowhere with my campaign. But
well, I don't love the idea of like denigrating it in that way, but I think I understand in some ways the impulse of that is
absolutely
to take away that need to have it be perfect right away. Like I'll be honest with you. I have a mantra for my own writing where I will sit down and say, you have permission to suck. Because it takes away that editor brain where I will judge it because it isn't perfect. It sort of reminds me, this is what this first draft is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a step along the way. And I think most of us have sort of an intuitive understanding with other people that creativity doesn't respond to the stick. It only responds to the carrot. And we, like I always say, picture a child. Would you ever say, oh, you stupid kid, you're not walking yet, when they take their first step? You'd go, oh, great. That's like the first step en route to you being able to walk across the room. But we do it to ourselves.
That. Yeah. Oh, we do. I use the analogy, would you fault a baby for not being an adult? So it's identical to yours. Yeah. And first of all, I think anyone should use any mantra that gets them to get past overwhelm, past procrastination, and to sit down and go at it again. So what it really is, similar to your book, a very personal process in terms of how you edit, in terms of how you come back to it. It's a very personal process. So for me, the mantra that I use for first drafts is a phrase I cannot stand in the rest of life, but for first drafts, I love it in my head. It works. It's all good, that is my equivalent of whatever yours was, it doesn't suck or it's supposed to suck, whatever, for some reason it's all good, helps to get past the log jam of, but I know this sentence isn't going to be right. I know I'm going to have to swap that out. As editors, oh my gosh, the things we know, if we could just unknow them for whatever it takes to do a first draft, that would be very helpful to just shut that off. But my mantra that serves, and I would love everyone to get one that serves them, is it's all good. And another, in the first draft, believe me, by the 40th draft, no, it's not, but I know what I'm doing then. And, but I think that those kinds of things really help a writer, if they have that mantra. For me, don't try to fix it. It's really helped me. Don't revise, reconstitute. I'm still talking about early drafts where I struggle the most. Those mantras really, really help. And then that and a whole list of very common things we can begin to look for in the revision process. Where are the hotspot moments we should be showing rather than telling? I like to open in scene and close in scene. Are there moments there that are already maybe in the wrong place, but that I could do? Where's the reflective? Where am I beginning to kind of get to why I was writing about this in the first place? That usually simmers on the page somewhere, not where you know it when you're writing it. But so I'll look at like those kinds of things, and that helps me begin to reconstitute in those early drafts. And then again, I don't know the numeric count, but a lot of drafts come after that. A lot of drafts fairly quickly, but it's not a once and done.
I like that you point out not just, and you talk more about this in the essay that will accompany this interview, which will also be a link below. But I really like that you've talked over and over as we've been chatting here about this is your process and how every author has to find the process that works for them, because it's not a one size fits all. Nothing about a creative business is
right
or anything.
Right. Yeah. Well, you emphasize that, several times in intuitive editing, and that makes so much sense. I think we're often sold this bill of goods that there is one process, and the one that gets the most airtime is you start with an outline and you make that outline and then you write. And I would say 90% of the thousands of writers I've worked with They cannot outline. Neither can I. An outline, I love the best quote I heard about outlining came from Aaron Hamburger, who wrote, of course, because it's the first question everybody asks at writing conferences. Well, do you do an outline before you work on your novel or your memoir? And I love the way he answered it, which was, of course I do an outline after I finish the first draft. And so I'm not opposed to plotters, but that's what we're told. Do this outline. It's third grade all over again. What are you going to say? Here's your 3 supporting points. Now repeat what you said. But the creative process, from my experience, which is a pretty wide swath of writers, is very often it's a much more organic popcorn style. You don't need to know where you're going to start. You don't need to know the flow or the architecture yet early on. And because people think they need to know where to start or what's going to come next, that's when the manuscripts end up in the drawer, or boredom sets in. And so I very much advocate, well, make up a scene or write the scene you've been holding off writing because it doesn't come until the back third of the book, write in any order. And what's gorgeous about that creative process, if it works for you, and I would argue it works for so many people who are not the more linear types, is that very often the scenes will reveal a much more organic plot than what your left brain might have been thinking about if you tried to write it in order. This happened and then this happened, and suddenly you can see, well, I'll reverse this or this that I thought might be at the back end of the book. Oh my God, that's chapter 2, wouldn't it be? That would really create some causality and some conflict. So that beautiful popcorn style, just writing any scene that calls out to you can sometimes lure you to your desk faster. It means you never have to worry about not knowing what comes next because you're just gathering and accumulating scenes. And when you get a critical mass of scenes, I think, not to get mystical because I'm a very sort of practical type of writer and writing teacher, but when you get some kind of critical mass, they begin to tell you a structure. They begin to suggest an organic plot line. And it's a gorgeous thing. And I've seen so many books come together like that. So it takes faith. How will these things?
Oh, what a great way to think of it.
They do. And
so isn't that the essence of creativity to me? Yes. I mean, it doesn't, like you say, I think every writer needs to find what works for them. And if you're an outliner, outline your brains out.
Yeah.
But it does feel like that. If I shoot my creative wad on the outline, I don't want to write the book anymore. I just need to find it. I need to go on the journey with them.
Yeah. And I would argue that popcorn style works as much for thrillers and mysteries where clearly there needs to be a strong plot line and causality and clues planted here and seated there. But that can happen in the back end. And I think that it doesn't require extra time to write in this style either. I think what requires extra time is if you're stuck and you don't write. And
I think it's worth trying. Like anything is worth trying. If what you're doing isn't necessarily working as well for you as you'd like it to, try it the other way. If you're a pantser, give an outline a try. But if you are an outliner and you are running into some of these issues that you've just brought up, I love the idea that you said of have faith. I think it's hard to jump off the cliff not knowing if the net will appear. But that's kind of what an artist does every day.
I think so. And if you write scenes, you're writing a novel, say you're writing a novel, even a memoir for that matter, you can't go too far wrong. A scene is the vital component of a novel. A scene is the critical component of a memoir. And frankly, in my world, a scene is a critical component of an essay. So you can't go too far wrong. If you're writing a scene that has some vibration that you think is, part of this atmosphere of the piece you're writing, because now you're going to have a great scene. It might have to be massaged. It might not go anywhere you thought it might have gone, but it's still a component that is going to begin to educate you when you get a critical mass of them to how maybe to structure this thing. And I think it works just as well on those more plot-driven genres as it does for different types of genres. So, and it's always better than not writing.
It's always better than not writing.
Yeah. And I think scenes are fun to write.
They come,
and when you don't know exactly the point of the scene, they're even more fun in some ways because, well, don't worry about what you don't know. Just write it. Have your people do something. Put words in their mouth. And weirdly enough, when you let go, sometimes the most profound or the perfect dialogue or action or detail or internal monologue lands on the page when you're not being overly trolling. So.
Yeah, I'm not particularly woo-woo either, but I agree with you that there's it's almost like this membrane between our conscious awareness and whatever happens on the other side of the membrane that is that pure creative impulse, whatever you want to call that, inspiration, the muse, divine, I don't know what, but yeah, there, if you're open to that, I feel like that's part of the joy of creativity, is that it puts you in touch with this other realm almost, and it's part of who you are, but it's also a little bit external to you.
It's I think it's a miracle.
It's a
If
miracle.
you ever want to prove this to yourself, I'm talking to your listeners, go to a prompt workshop, or exchange a prompt with somebody. And so I do hundreds of prompt workshops. I just love them. And so the writers will be there. Maybe they're working on a project, maybe they're just hoping to find a project, and I'll throw out a prompt like, meet me at 2:00. You have 10 minutes to write. If that, the scenes that come out of that, and frankly, the scenes that have come out of some rando prompt I will give, and I have seen land in finished novels over and over and over. So it really shows you in 9 minutes, if you really let go, if you start moving that pen, you're giving that prompt, that if you get out of your own way, your unconscious gets to come to the fore and show off its stuff. And it's an amazing thing to see, and it never fails anybody. It's weird how valuable prompts can be.
I'm going to grab it. My husband bought me this deck. I thought that's what it was called. It's the Storymatic. And it's all
I've seen that.
It's these cards, and it's a bunch of prompts, and you pull 2 cards. I forget, one is like the setup and one is like another element of it. And you can just mix and match it. I mean, you see how many cards are in here. And to your point, just to take something like that, think of it as an exercise, think of it as whatever you want to take the pressure off, but let it open you up.
Yeah. And for one thing, once you start moving your hand, that already lubricates some of the creative process. But again, your unconscious will probably, regardless of the prompt, take you to something meaningful. For example, your project in progress or whatever. It's just weird how it can just connect to that, or it taps into something that should be your next essay or whatever, because it's meaningful to you. It's a magical thing. There are some things that make it work. You want to move your hand right away. It's not speed writing, but you want to keep the thoughts going. Don't worry about linearity or whether it makes sense. It could be word salad, it could be word association, but very quickly you often dive right into some, whoa, where did that come from moment? And there's the perfect character trait or the next scene or whatever. So that really shows that if you have faith in the creative process and get out of your way, not in the late stage editing, that's more of a left brain thing, obviously, but oh my gosh, the creative process can be almost weirdly effortless. The beginning of the creative process. So it's a beautiful thing to see. So yeah, I love doing prompt workshops because I just think they're amazing. So.
All right. I'm sort of I keep going to like the greatest hits of the Joni Cole fan club, but your newest that just released, Toxic Feedback, is one of your 2 books for writers. I haven't read this one yet, but the title alone makes me want to hug you and then give you a megaphone, because I always say that a good, whatever it is, critique, beta read, feedback, editor, whatever it is, a good one of those can transform your writing in a way you may never have realized it could. A bad one can do more damage to your story, you as a writer, your psyche, you as a human being, than almost anything I have seen, because it's such our creative efforts are such an open and vulnerable and tender, real thing. So talk more about Toxic Feedback.
Yeah. It's to me, the most overlooked aspect of something that can often be the difference between writing and not writing, whether we get feedback, or the difference between writing and writing well. Feedback can be the determinant in both of those, but it's a delicate dynamic, which doesn't mean it has to be like tiptoed around all the time. But because it's been given so little thought, people, just including myself at times, go willy-nilly into this exchange, not really thinking about what will serve the writer or how their tone of voice might impact the writer, or whether they're saying anything really useful, or are they at all applying their emotional IQ to this. So it's just kind of this willy-nilly thing. So you might show me something, Tiffany, I'll be like, if I was a thoughtless feedback provider, like, I didn't get it, or that was really good, or I don't know, it's not my thing. So that kind of feedback nobody's trying to be toxic. That's one argument in toxic feedback. There might be 1 or or 5 people in the world that purposely are trying to bring you down as a writer, out of jealousy, but it's mostly thoughtless. And that does not mean it requires years of study to be a good feedback provider or recipient, but it does mean just pay attention. This is an interaction with huge implications for the writer and frankly for the feedback giver, because it is deeply meaningful to help somebody with their writing. But again, you want to pay attention to the process. So how much or how little feedback you give, be specific in your feedback. You're not there to fix their writing or even give them suggestions, but to be specific in this part. I was confused because of this, or I love this part. One big vein of toxic feedback talks about, and not at all in a lot of way, the power of positive feedback. If it's articulated, if it's specific in terms of helping a writer write better. And there's been studies about this, and I'm not talking about feedback sandwiches, where they're kind of contrived or
right. We have to explain what that is if people don't know. For Tracy,
you give the writer a comment. Well, I like that you gave your character red hair. The middle of this book bored the hell out of me. Oh, I thought your sentences were cleanly written. So within 2 pieces of feedback bread, you put the downer in the middle. It's not, at least it was progress when people came up with a feedback sandwich, because where we started and where we're still at in many ways is the only feedback that matters is brutal honesty. And there is nothing productive about brutality, nothing. Many writers are good at overcoming tough feedback, but it actually squanders a way to give more thoughtful and more useful feedback. So, and for example, people say, just tell me what's not working, right? People say that a lot too. No, because then the writer has no perspective. And I can tell you they leave and they feel defeated. And again, we're not tiny babies. We can overcome it, but we might procrastinate more. It brings less joy versus when a balanced feedback discussion, whether it's one-on-one or in a workshop, actually leans towards the positive in a very sincere way. There is no flattery here. There is no stroking the writer's ego, though what's wrong with that anyway, but in a very positive way. I like this. This worked because this is the section that I sat up with, I think that might make a good opening. So the power of positive feedback, the power of specificity, the total letting go of any kind of brutality as a model for offering feedback. There's lots of ways to both give and receive feedback that once they just come on your radar, you'll do them intuitively. It doesn't take 17 lessons. It takes one book or one well-run workshop to begin to see the model for providing feedback in a way that really motivates and educates the writer forward. So to me, feedback is, often where the rubber meets the road. It really is, but it's just often done not thoughtlessly in a mean way, again, right. But thoughtlessly in that there was a thought put into it.
I think I think it can be done unskillfully. And I also think there's a misconception that if it's, like I always call my feedback, positive, constructive, actionable. And I think there can be a misconception that, oh, you're just blowing smoke. As you said, you're stroking the writer's ego. It's not that. Like, you can give really insightful, specific, clear, actionable feedback that is not, it's not easy to hear, but it can be given in a way that focuses on the positive and gives you a way forward. So it's not, I think the proponents of brutal honesty are like, well, it doesn't do the author any favors if you candy coat it or handle it with kid gloves, because that's not how the business is. Well, maybe not, but I don't think that creativity is going to respond to being smacked down like a whack-a-mole.
Yeah. And there's no instructive quality to that type of feedback. And I think that what helps is it's very useful for serving writers when you give feedback to help them build their stories from their strengths up. Because almost by default, the more they amplify what has the seed of promise or is the strongest part of it, the more by some strange way, some of the problems drift away a little bit. So, but yet constructive is huge, is the operative word, and positive feedback is very constructive. And of course, some kind of criticism can be constructive depending on where they're at. But underneath it all is paying attention to how much can that writer hear in that moment. Because this is where I think sometimes I make mistakes. I'll give too much feedback. And a lot of it will be, a real onslaught of praise and sincere praise, but it'll still be too much. There's just too much. And then, or I'll think I'll see lots of little areas for improvement, and, maybe inundate a little bit too much, whereas just focus on right now on more scenic, writing versus fix that grammar, fix that. So measuring how much feedback is something I always have to work on, but it should all be constructive, and meaning it helps the writer write forward productively. And it's one of the most beautiful things to give feedback, for example, in a workshop, and then the writer comes in with the next draft the next week, and it's just so much better. And they're excited and they can wait to get back to the writing table versus like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And when you give thoughtful feedback as writers, oh my gosh, it teaches you as much.
Oof.
Oh, I think giving feedback almost serves your own writing more than getting feedback sometimes on your manuscripts, because, now I see that part is kind of slow. Oh, that's what people have been trying to tell me,
Because you're objective with somebody else's story in a way you can't be with your own, and you can see this stuff.
Yeah. And so I love the topic of feedback. I love the delivery of it. I love when I get it. The nice thing too is it's not precious. The more we get inured or inundated with it, the more we can sift out the feedback that isn't serving us. Certainly the feedback that isn't serving our writing, but also serving us. I don't get so bent out of shape when someone I got feedback the other day on a piece. I write a column, and you know how the comment sections are in places. So this is a column in a couple of newspapers, and one of the bits of feedback was, "This is crap."
Helpful.
but that, I'm laughing about it, and because but I'm inured. It didn't bother me, but it didn't bother me, I think, because I wrote a book on feedback. And while that actually used to be the standard type of feedback, and doesn't it make the feedback provider sound smart? Like they are the judgment, giver. But it just made me laugh, because I don't take it seriously. Like, I take feedback very seriously, but that kind of judgment, that kind of pronouncement, I mean, that's anyway. And the bottom line is, Tiffany, I'm getting another essay out of it, because that was one of those funny moments where you write something, and then the very few people that take the time to give comments, they're usually the whatever. And one of them is, "This is crap." And there's something in there about that experience. I know there's an essay in there. I have no idea what it is. And by the way, that essay was not crap.
Is the book geared toward like how to give feedback, how to get feedback, how to solicit it from people, how to process it, all of that?
Yeah, it's in sections: giving feedback, receiving feedback. And then the third section is about organizing either a workshop or a one-on-one exchange. And then in the interstices, I think I have, I don't know, I'm just guessing, but 10 or so author interviews from just wonderful authors. And they tell me their own feedback stories. So one of my favorites, shortly before she passed, gave me an interview. Grace Paley is in it. Gregory Maguire, the fellow who wrote Wicked and all those, he told me his stories. Matthew Salacy's, I interviewed him. So their feedback stories across the board are really, really interesting and motivating to see how they've used feedback, or been set back by feedback, or were just given wings because of feedback. And Joni B talks about feedback in the book. So there's wonderful author interviews in there about their feedback.
It's process. An undertaught skill, in line with sort of what you were saying about, how editing and revision really get a bit of short shrift, I think, in many writers' views. I think because all of this is interrelated, and they're all undertaught skills. We teach writing as if it only applies to drafting.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. And and I think that much of feedback could be a hybrid, for example, of intuitive editing. Part of my feedback is explaining, if somebody wants to make a moment come alive, explaining how they do that, or explaining, to look at certain types of line edits if you're that far along or whatever. Though I do line edits all along because they cheer me up. Sometimes that's the only thing I know, is, well, this should be a better verb. Oh, I don't need that clause. Oh, I certainly don't need that filter verb there or whatever. But yeah, to incorporate instruction into feedback is a beautiful marriage right
Yeah.
there. But I think, feedback from a beta reader doesn't know a clue about craft, or even a new workshop member who doesn't understand craft, that feedback is equally valid, really valid, because
That's your
that's
reader.
raw reader response. And
Yep.
so yeah, whether it's a feedback that's teaching you maybe how to address something in the piece, or just feedback that's showing you where people, were a little lost
Right.
or whatever. It's really helpful. But man, oh man, it can also majorly set you back, which is where the title came from when I was in graduate school and got feedback. Guy tells me the story, which already had been workshopped up the wazoo at another writing program, right? So I couldn't have been that bad a story. But this guy, I'm paying a fortune for these stupid classes, and the guy writes on the back of this, it was a short story actually. He writes on the back, "It's all wrong."
Oh,
So
wow.
this was the nugget, the core, the hub of my creative writing graduate school experience. And the proudest moment in one of the proudest moments of my life is that I overcame that. Yeah. Because I didn't want to be one of those people who didn't overcome that. And now years later, I'm still mad as hell about it, but I've gotten books out of it. It totally informed my entire paradigm for teaching. Everything that man did, I do the opposite, not just in reaction, but because I saw, the brutality, some people still agree with this, but this is a practice I don't agree, making the writers anonymous, as if they've created they're juvenile delinquents or something. So you can't talk about them, or I can't tell you, Tiffany, directly my thoughts, your story. You got to be anonymous, the competition in groups that he fostered. Obviously, there was some misogyny involved too, where the male authors or writers, because this was a graduate program, were chosen, I don't know, 80, 90% of the time. Everything he did was such a gift to me, because as someone who's experiencing it, I learned as a teacher, those things, man, they're the opposite of helping people write more, write better, and be happier. And so I should dedicate the book to him, but I had to kind of disguise it in the book. To some degree, I disguised him. I couldn't disguise him completely, because truth is truth. And so at one point I thought I'd change his gender and tell the story it was a woman, but I couldn't, because that affected the truth of the story. There was some misogyny in his being or whatever. He's still at the program. It's like crazy.
I've heard more stories than I wish I had about MFA programs, graduate programs, where it feels more destructive than helping a writer grow as a writer.
Yeah, it's interesting. I teach at the Writers Center of White River Junction, Vermont, right? And while I would argue it's better than a lot of the classes and programs that are out there that are really noteworthy, I get a lot of MFA refugees. They've been through MFA programs and they are deflated. And that is striking to me. But what's equally striking is a lot of times they don't know basic narrative craft. And I'm like, where do you learn that? I get maybe high school English teachers, the poor people are tasked with teaching it, but they don't have time. And then in college, narrative craft is rarely taught, but in an MFA program, you would think that it would be taught. But so yeah, I get a lot of people that have already been through MFA programs, and they're just gems. That said, then I know countless people who have adored their MFA program. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, like everything, but it would be nice if this is where we started. I really like your idea of authors advocating for themselves and their own careers. And I think you have to find that happiness inside of you, and that confidence, even when what you're writing is not as good as it could be, you can still be confident about your writing, and you should be, because that's part of like everything else, it's on a spectrum, and you're getting where you're going.
Yeah, you can be very confident about the drafting process.
Yeah.
If you're willing to hang in there and write forward and get feedback, and, then you will get where you want to go. And if you need craft, you can get craft. Creative writing can be taught. I know that sounds a little la-la, but I get that there's certainly such a thing as an ear and talent. But if you connect with your voice and you're willing to acquire that craft, and then you're writing the stories that make sense for you to write. I've seen people with no ear for writing write beautiful pieces,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they worked hard to figure out how to do that. And a lot of that was craft and feedback, but and going at it again and again. And then I've seen writers who have gorgeous ears, but they're not willing to listen. And so there's missed opportunities. There's pieces that might have a lyricism, but no story, you know, so it's really paying attention to how readers are responding, not then checking off the boxes. I better do what Tiffany says or Joni says, but really paying attention to it can be so informative and illuminating to make your work really mean and communicate what matters to you. And so, yeah, you also have to know, I think, when not to get feedback. Oh, there's times I'm just so fragile. Nobody, you know, I'm not going to show anybody anything. So you have to make sure you're not so protective, or you know exactly what you want to do. And enough feedback is enough until you kind of catch up. So that's a big part of, as the writer, we don't think about managing the process, making sure that we get the feedback we need, but also making sure at times we don't, you know,
take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we
so
know,
it's just a conscious, yeah, it's a conscious interaction. Both sides of the interaction need to be aware of serving either their own creative process or serving the creative process of who's ever you're trying to, you know, help out. So I think it's a fascinating thing. And the nice thing is, like, toxic feedback is all the examples and stories for the most part are about writing interactions, but it's not a far stretch. It's just about communication. You know, when you send your steak back, how are you going to give that feedback, you know, in a way that serves and gets you a better steak, or in a way that, you know, trashes the poor server and whatever. In business, oh my gosh. Yeah, go to a business meeting, you know, and are your ideas going to be heard, or will there be a productive conversation, or will it be some blowhard or whatever, you know? So feedback is a part of every aspect of life, including on the domestic front, you know, how you talk to your partner or your kids. And there are many right ways, but there are also many wrong ways, you know. That, and in the end, they don't serve anybody, you know. So I just love this topic, feedback and writing, and I love the topic of revision because it's just so magical.
They're so connected. All right, I could do this with you all day long, obviously, and I would if I didn't stop myself. That's probably as good a place as any to wrap up on. Hopefully, leaving authors with something that they can use actionable toward their own career.
Oh, I hope so. Isn't that our goal? Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more about, if people want to find you, and I'll bet they do. Tell me some places they can do that.
Sure. They could go to my author website, which is my name, Joni B. Cole. .com, and there is a link to my writing workshops and my writing retreat and my books. So my author website is probably the best link. And yeah, I'd love to hear from people. Most of my classes are on Zoom, so
I'll post links to the Writer Center as well.
Yeah, there's teaching and consulting. There's a button right for that, and that does bounce you to another website, my Writer Center website, but it's still the best clearinghouse is the Joni B. Cole website. So yeah, come and visit me, and I'd love to read people's drafts.
Cool. I meant I had all these questions about talking about how you got where you are, and I didn't even get to them because I was fascinated by all this. So I'm going to have you back again. Toxic Feedback is out right now. I'm going to post a link for that below too. Little note to self. Thank you, Joni. I'm so glad we finally got to do this. Thank you for your warmth and your generosity with your process and just everything that you know and teach to authors.
Well, this has been a real gift, Tiffany. Thank you. I do want to say one more thing, that some of the outlets show that Toxic Feedback is already sold out. The books are in warehouses. They are available, but I think they went from pre-order to sold out quickly, but the books are definitely in the warehouse, moving towards wherever people might want to get their books. So this has been such fun and really, really inspiring for my writing process. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been great. And we'll do it again.
Great.
Thanks, Joni.